What would you do if your own family ignored everything you built until the day you walked into court and they had to rise when you entered? My name is Dahlia Carrion. I'm 36. I'm a federal judge. And until that morning in Raleigh, North Carolina, my parents thought I was a paralegal somewhere in Oregon. They never asked. They never cared enough to ask. They never even knew what I looked like in court because they never showed up. That day, I sat quietly in the back row of a federal courtroom vaulted ceiling, varnished wood, the bitter scent of stale coffee clinging to the air. Every footstep echoed like it belonged to someone more important than me. The prosecution team was prepping. My sister Sloane sat at the defense table, calm, smiling, too polished. My parents were seated proudly behind her straight-backed, whispering about how this would all blow over. "She's too smart to go down like this," I heard my father say. "She's always had such good instincts," my mother added. "It's just a misunderstanding." They didn't know I was even in the room. They didn't see me pass through security, didn't recognize me when I walked in behind a group of reporters. Plain charcoal suit, no robe, head down, just like I always had been, invisible. The trial began, and within the first hour it was already falling apart. Not for Sloane, for the court. Jurisdictional red flags, federal implications, cross-state wire fraud. This case was bigger than they thought, and the current judge didn't have the power to finish it. A quiet sidebar, then a recess, then silence. As Judge Calloway leaned forward, cleared his throat, and said calmly, "This court is no longer authorized to proceed under state jurisdiction. We are requesting immediate federal oversight." He turned and looked straight at me. "Judge Carrion, would you please take the bench I stood? No rush, no apology, just precision." The sound of my heels hitting the tile was the only thing anyone could hear. My mother gasped. My father's jaw slackened. Sloane's face went pale. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, voice smooth as polished steel. And just like that, the daughter they never believed in, the one they once told to be realistic about law school, walked past them all and took her rightful place. At the bench, above the lies, beyond their imagination. I was 12 when I learned I didn't matter, not in their world, not in her shadow. It was the spring of my sister Sloane's senior year. She'd just won the Governor's Scholar Award. Prestigious, statewide, flashy. My parents threw her a backyard party like she'd just solved world hunger. Balloons, string lights, catered food. They even rented a white tent, just in case it rained. That same week, I won first place in a regional middle school debate competition. I printed my own certificate on the school printer and taped it proudly to the fridge, right above the grocery list. The next morning, it was gone, replaced by a brunch invitation for Sloane's celebration. When I asked about it, my mother didn't even look up from her phone. "Oh, honey," she said, "that's lovely. But Sloane's award is a state honor. Let's not confuse things." That phrase stuck with me for years. Let's not confuse things. Sloane sparkled. I was supposed to stay dim. She was the headline. I was the footnote. She was charismatic, camera-ready, easier to brag about. And I read case law for fun, made flowcharts to relax, and once in 8th grade tried explaining judicial precedent at dinner. My dad laughed mid-bite. "Dahlia, you gonna start billing us for these lectures?" Sloane giggled. "God, Dahlia, do you even hear yourself?" They laughed. I stopped talking much after that. By high school, Sloane had become a local legend. She invented an app that tracked cafeteria, waste somehow got a TEDx talk, and won 3 scholarships in 1 semester. I joined mock trial. By junior year, I captained our team. We went undefeated the entire season. Not one dinner mentioned it. No claps. No good job. Not even a fridge magnet. My only safe place was room 214, Mr. Shepard's government class. He treated the Constitution like scripture, taught us that logic was a form of justice. One day after class, I stayed behind to clean the whiteboard. He looked at me and said something I've never forgotten. "You think like a litigator, Dahlia. Not because you're loud, but because you notice what everyone else misses. He gave me a dog-eared copy of Gideon's Trumpet. I read it in 2 nights, and from that moment on, I didn't just want to study law. I wanted to command it. College was my escape hatch. I earned a full ride to UNC Chapel Hill, early admission, top of my class. No fanfare, no congratulations. I packed my own boxes and left before sunrise. Nobody noticed I'd already moved out. I didn't come home for Thanksgiving, didn't mention that I was applying to Yale Law. When the acceptance letter arrived, I didn't scream or jump. I just folded it neatly into my journal and walked for 2 hours in the rain. There was no one to tell. No one who would have cared, except Mariah, my college roommate. She walked in one night and found me surrounded by casebooks scribbling notes on a whiteboard we shared for grocery lists. She blinked, then said, "You're terrifying." But in the best way. That's brilliant. She was the first person who ever used that word for me. Brilliant. Mariah became my first witness to the person I was becoming. Law school was brutal, but I thrived in the quiet, the library shadows, the courtroom simulations, the cold logic of federal codes. I didn't party, didn't chase applause, didn't post about internships. I just worked. By 28, I had clerked under a federal judge in D.C. By 31, I was overseeing complex litigation through a specialized judicial task force. By 34, I was discreetly appointed to the federal bench. No announcement, no press, no photos. My court didn't do publicity. Our work dealt in classified fraud cases, interstate high risk, often sealed. I liked it that way. In Charlotte, my family still thought I was a legal assistant or something close to it. My mother once described it to a neighbor as, "Oh, she helps attorneys file things, very behind the scenes." I let her, because by then I didn't need their recognition. My courtroom had become my cathedral. The gavel, my voice, the law, my sanctuary. But I'd be lying if I said I never wished just once they'd ask, "What do you actually do, Dahlia?" But they never did. Then 2 years ago, the phone rang. I was in chambers reviewing a sealed case when the name lit up the screen. Sloan. First time I'd heard from her in over a year. "Hey, Dahlia," she chirped like we were old friends. "I need a little favor." Of course she did. She'd started some fintech company, something about ethical investing algorithms. Millions raised. Buzz on social media. My parents framed her 30 Under 30 magazine cover. I didn't correct her when she said, "You're good with legal stuff, right?" Just a quick glance over a few contracts. She called it my legal hobby. I should have hung up. But some pathetic part of me still wanted her to see me, to recognize me, to need me. So I said yes. Sloan sent me a pile of contracts. Messy, contradictory, reckless. I spent 3 weekends combing through every clause. Federal compliance violations, investor loopholes, statements that could have triggered regulatory audits on the spot. I didn't just fix them, I built her legal foundation from scratch. 15 pages, annotated, coded, bulletproof. I sent it off with a quiet note, "All done. You'll want to tighten these before next round." No reply, no thank you. Not even a thumbs up emoji. A week later, Mariah sent me a link. Sloan on stage at her company's board presentation. Hair curled, smile flawless, spotlight ready. "I noticed a few issues with our documents," she said confidently. My instincts kicked in. I cleaned them up just in time. Applause, standing ovation. I watched from my chambers, cold, silent, numb. She hadn't even read those contracts before I touched them, and still she stood there soaking in the praise. LinkedIn post. Caption. "Trust your gut, especially when everything's on the line." My parents commented with fire emojis and "so proud of our Sloan." The next day, my dad emailed me a link to her speech. Subject line. "Look what your sister's doing." No message, no question, no "how are you?" I didn't reply. Didn't mention the memo. Didn't tell them I was overseeing a federal inquiry into multi-state fraud operations. They wouldn't have cared, unless it involved a photo op or a hashtag. 6 months later, everything cracked. Whispers started circulating through judicial circles. Sloan's company was under investigation. SEC red flags. inflated earnings, investor complaints. The ethical tech darling had built her company on paper walls. At first I said nothing. I stayed in my lane. I had too many cases of my own. Then a sealed file landed on my desk. Preliminary jurisdictional review. Defendant Sloan Thatcher. I felt the air shift. I filed my conflict of interest notice within an hour. Recused myself. Explained everything privately to my chief judge. I assumed that was the end of it. But because of the nature of the case and my specialization, I was placed on federal standby, meaning if the case hit a jurisdictional snag, I'd be called. A shadow, a ghost in the gallery, ready to take the bench. It was routine. But in this case, it felt personal. Like the universe had lined it all up. A fuse, a match, a courtroom full of lies waiting to burn. She was the pride of the family until the judge called my name and the whole courtroom turned. The courthouse in Raleigh, North Carolina was a fortress. Stone steel silence, built to feel permanent, built to make you small. That morning, I didn't enter through the main doors. Consulting judges don't make entrances. We observe. We stay invisible until we don't. I wore no robe, just a plain charcoal suit, hair tied back. No makeup, a badge tucked into my inner pocket that opened more doors than a last name ever could. The courtroom was already packed. Sloan sat at the defense table flanked by two lawyers with $1,000 watches. To the average eye, she looked confident, but I saw at the twitch in her right hand, the tension in her jawline. She knew. Somewhere deep down, she knew this wasn't going away. My parents were seated proudly behind her. My mother wore pearls too bright for her blouse. My father's jaw clenched like the whole ordeal was beneath him. They still hadn't noticed me. Even when a local reporter asked, "What about your other daughter?" My mother smiled. "Sloan's our pride," she said. "Our younger one. She's private, quiet, not really built for this kind of pressure." I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse. I'd lived worse. Then came the moment. The prosecution introduced evidence, emails, wire transfers accounts, crossing state lines. That was the break, the point of no return. Federal statutes triggered, state jurisdiction overruled. The presiding judge called a recess. I heard him in the hallway, voice low urgent. "We're in federal territory now. I need the standby." The clerk nodded. "You're up." I returned to the courtroom, still unnoticed, still dismissed, until Judge Calloway stood. This case now falls under federal jurisdiction. We are invoking the presence of a consulting judge pre-cleared for this circuit. He turned to the back. "Judge Carrion, would you please take the bench?" And just like that, the silence collapsed in on itself. Gasps, chairs shifting, reporters whipping around, pens pausing in mid-sentence. I rose. My heels clicked against the tile with the sound of certainty. My mother turned eyes wide, hand frozen on her necklace. My father blinked once like he'd seen a ghost. Sloan. She went absolutely still. "Yes, Your Honor," I said calmly. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise." And they did. The whole court stood. For me. I took my place at the bench. Everything slowed. Everything locked into place. Before me was the same file I'd read in secret. Now it was mine to oversee publicly, impartially, and without apology. "Let the record reflect this court now proceeds under federal jurisdiction," I said. "All previous motions will be reviewed under applicable federal statutes." Sloan's attorneys scrambled. The defense flinched. The prosecution surged forward with new energy. I ruled without hesitation. Precise, neutral, controlled. During the next recess, Sloan found me in the hallway. Her voice was sharp, too fast, cracking at the edges. "Dahlia, how could you do this to me?" I stared at her. "I'm not doing anything to you. You built this lie. Now it's falling apart." She stepped closer, disbelief curdling into desperation. "You're supposed to be my sister." I didn't blink. "No, you were supposed to be mine." Behind her, our mother appeared. Eyes glassy, voice brittle. "Dahlia, please. You don't know what this will do to our family." I turned, slowly met her gaze. "You were never worried about our family when you erased me." She said nothing, and for the first time, my father didn't defend anyone. He just stood there, watching me, really seeing me. When the verdict was read, I didn't flinch, because for the first time in my life, they were forced to see the daughter they tried to bury. 3 days. That's how long the trial lasted under federal review. 3 days of shredded defenses, panicked PR statements, and crumbling lies. The jury took less than 6 hours. I sat at the bench, robe crisp, voice steady, gavel untouched. The gallery was so quiet you could hear breathing. On the count of securities fraud, the 4-person read, "We find the defendant guilty." Sloan didn't move, but I saw her swallow. Once, hard. On the count of wire fraud, guilty. On the count of conspiracy to defraud investors, guilty. My mother choked on a breath. My father sat perfectly still as if frozen in cement. Sloan turned to me slowly. No rage, no apology, just disbelief. As if somewhere deep down she still thought she'd walk away untouched, like she always had. But the law doesn't care about family, only facts. I delivered the sentence like a scalpel, clean, precise. Given the scope and severity of offenses, the defendant is sentenced to the minimum term as prescribed by statute. No bail. Immediate transfer to federal custody. Let the record reflect sentencing is final pending appeal. I tapped the gavel. This session is adjourned. Flashes erupted from the press section. Voices shouted, questions, chaos. But I didn't look at them. I stood. I walked. I closed the chamber door behind me and let the silence wash over everything. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Voicemail. My mother. Her voice cracked as it spilled from the speaker. "Dahlia, we didn't know. We didn't realize. We're so sorry, delete. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. They had decades to ask who I was. They waited until I sat above them. That night I met Mariah at a jazz bar off South Street. She was already holding a glass. To Judge Carrion, she grinned. "You broke the illusion with one move," but I didn't smile. "It wasn't about breaking them," I said. "It was about stepping out of the shadow they built around me." She nodded. "So what now?" I looked around. The bar was dim, safe. No one knew who I was here. No headlines. No whispers. Now I said, "I build something better." Weeks passed, then months. Sloan was transferred to a federal women's facility in West Virginia. Minimum security, quarterly updates. I read them like weather forecasts. Cold, predictable, distant. My parents reached out 3 more times. A letter, a voicemail, a Christmas card. I didn't answer, not to be harsh, but because some fractures don't need mending. They need to stay broken to protect what finally became whole. 1 year later, I started mentoring. It began with one law student, Nia, 23, scared to raise her hand in class. Brilliant, terrified. She reminded me of myself. By her 3rd visit, she stood taller. By the 5th, she argued a case simulation and didn't blink once. Word spread. Now, every other Friday, 7 women gather in my chambers. Not loud, not flashy, just sharp minds, unshakable hearts. Told their whole lives they were too quiet or not tough enough for law. I don't teach them to be louder. I teach them to be strategic, to be the woman no one sees coming until it's too late. We don't talk about Sloan. We don't need to. One afternoon, I walked the halls of the courthouse alone. It was the anniversary of the verdict. Elevators silent, floors gleaming. Courtroom 3B was empty. I stood outside it, the place where everything changed. Then a soft voice behind me. Judge Carrion, I turned. A girl, maybe 16 in a blazer too big for her shoulders. Her teacher lingered behind her. "I saw your name on the plaque," she said. "You're the one who—" I nodded. "Yes, I am." She bit her lip. "I want to be a judge one day, but people say I'm too quiet." I smiled, then let them talk. "And you keep building." Her face lit up. She walked away lighter, taller. I stood there in the quiet. No cameras, no applause, just the weight of everything I'd carried, everything I'd outlived. They once called me invisible. Now when I speak, rooms rise. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family, told to shrink so someone else could shine? Drop your story in the comments. Let's make space for every voice that was ever told to stay small. And if this story hit you hard, subscribe and share it. Because your silence isn't the end. It's just the start of something bigger.